As more and more begin to know, the status quo has got to go. They're bound to say yes to a man named Dr. No, a man who makes the establishment panic. Grassroots are growing way too wild, too organic.
Last month, the U.S. Senate passed a resolution saying the over $34 trillion and growing national debt threatens national security. A few days later, a bipartisan majority of the Senate voted for a $1.2 trillion spending bill. In addition to the usual increases in war and welfare spending, the bill funds gender transitioning for minors without parental consent and red flag laws which allow law enforcement to seize an individual's firearms without due process. Before passage of the latest spending bill, the Congressional Budget Office released a report predicting that the national debt would exceed the prior record of 106.4% of gross domestic product by 2028. Interest payments on the national debt are estimated to reach $870 billion this year, more than the government will spend in the military. The CBO estimates that unless Congress cuts spending, which is highly unlikely, by 2051, interest on the debt will exceed not just military spending, but spending on the two biggest items in the federal budget, Social Security and Medicare. As Eric Boehm of Reason magazine points out, the CBO report understates how much federal spending will grow in the next several decades, since it cannot predict what crises the future Congresses and presidents will exploit to ramp up federal spending. As Boehm suggests, someone projecting 30 years ago how much government would spend in the future would not have included the increases in spending due to 9/11, the subsequent creation of a Homeland Security industrial complex, the forever wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, the housing meltdown, or the COVID lockdown. The hypothetical budget projections would also not have predicted legislation like the Medicare prescription drug benefit or Obamacare. The large and growing interest on the national debt puts pressure on the Federal Reserve to keep interest rates low. The Federal Reserve's rate increases, though relatively small, are one reason national debt payments rose by 32% since last year. The need for the Federal Reserve to keep interest rates low will further erode the dollar's purchasing power, subjecting more Americans to the insidious inflation tax. It will eventually cause a loss of the dollar's world reserve currency status. This will result in a major economic meltdown that will likely lead to widespread civil unrest, the further growth of authoritarian movements on both the left and right, and new restrictions on liberty. The only way out of this is for Congress to begin winding down the welfare warfare state. A good place to start is by cutting spending on militarism and foregoing interventionism. Savings from these cuts could be used to ensure those dependent on entitlement and welfare programs are not harmed as Congress winds down these programs. Responsibility for providing support for the truly needy should be returned to local and religious charitable institutions, while responsibility for education should be returned to local communities and parents. Congress should also pass legislation requiring any new spending to be offset by cuts in other federal spending and forbidding the Federal Reserve from purchasing federal debt instruments. These steps will be opposed by the special interests that benefit from the current system, but they are the only way to ensure the blessings of liberty and prosperity to our posterity. Thanks for listening.
So on Monday, an Israeli airstrike leveled an Iranian consulate building that is next to the Iranian embassy in Syria, in the Syrian capital of Damascus. And this is a huge escalation of Israeli attacks on Iranians in the region. They have been targeting Iranians quite a bit since October 7th in Syria, but an attack on the embassy, an attack on a diplomatic facility. I mean, just imagine any other country doing this and what the response would be. It just goes to show, you know, the what a rogue state, I guess you could say, Israel is. And so at least 7 people were killed in the strike, including General Mohammad Reza Zahedi, who was a senior commander in Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC. And Iran has confirmed his death and said that he oversaw the IRGC's Quds forces operations in Syria and Lebanon. So a very senior Iranian general was killed here. And the IRGC said that the strikes also killed his deputy, who is another general, and 5 other Iranian officers. So a total of 7 members of the IRGC killed by Israel. And I should mention, when it comes to Israel's airstrikes in Syria, we know they bomb Syria all the time. This is something that they've done for years, and since October 7th, they've really ramped up the airstrikes. They usually don't officially take credit for individual airstrikes. So you'll see, if you see this reported, there's other media reports that are calling these alleged Israeli airstrikes, but it's very clear that Israel is the one who did this. They're the ones who are constantly bombing Syria. So anyway, Iran is vowing a harsh response. The Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesman said that Tehran will, quote, decide on the type of response and punishment against the aggressor, end quote. So the bombing of the diplomatic facility comes a few days after Israel launched some of its heaviest airstrikes in Syria that reportedly killed 52 people, including Syrian soldiers and members of Lebanon's Hezbollah. Israel has also killed multiple members of the IRGC since it ramped up airstrikes in Syria after October 7th. So just recently, I covered some airstrikes in eastern Syria that killed the IRGC, an Iranian advisor in Syria. So this is just an escalation of what Israel has been doing for the past few months, targeting Iranians in Syria. So now the chances of Iran, the chances of them, having a big response here that could escalate things to that level. I mean, Iran takes a lot of things on the chin, like they take a lot from Israel and from the U.S. and don't necessarily always respond. But this is, again, a bombing of a diplomatic facility, an attack on the embassy. So it's a different thing. And 7 members of the IRGC and a very senior commander are killed here. So I would be surprised if they don't do anything. The question is what their response is going to be here. CNN reported on Monday that the Biden administration is close to approving a massive $18 billion arms deal for Israel that includes 50 F-15 fighter jets. The news is the latest sign that the administration still strongly supports Israel's slaughter of Palestinians in Gaza, despite what U.S. officials might claim to be concerned about when it comes to civilian casualties and the starvation in Gaza. Last week, as I covered yesterday, President Biden approved more bomb shipments to Israel and an F-35 deal worth $2.5 billion. And this F-15 deal, I believe, includes more munitions and other things and all sorts of equipment and training and maintenance for the F-15s, for the next few decades that Israel will use them for. So the CNN report said that the administration informally notified the House Foreign Affairs and Senate Foreign Relations committees about the potential F-15 deal back in January. The top Republicans on both committees, Senator James Reich and Representative Michael McCaul, they have already given their approval of the deal. So the Democrats on these committees could potentially, if they raise objections, it could slow things down. But I doubt it when it comes to Democratic leadership on the Foreign Affairs committees. They're probably not going to raise any objections about it. And so House Speaker Mike Johnson said in an interview on Sunday that he supports the idea of giving frozen Russian central bank funds to Ukraine to fuel the proxy war, a step that would significantly escalate the U.S. economic campaign against Russia. So Johnson expressed support for the Repo Act, which is a bill that's been introduced in both chambers of Congress, and it would authorize the Secretary of State to, quote, provide additional assistance to Ukraine using assets confiscated from the Central Bank of the Russian Federation and other sovereign assets of the Russian Federation and for other purposes, end quote. So very broad authorization. They call it confiscation. It's stealing. It's theft. That's what it would be. And discussing the Repo Act, Johnson said, quote, if we can use the seized assets of Russian oligarchs to allow the Ukrainians to fight them, that's just pure poetry, end quote. So the big problem with this, I think, is, of course, there's all sorts of bad precedents that will be set here. But if they take this money, these Russian central bank funds, it's just going to, the possible reconciliation between Russia and the West and the U.S., which of course already seems like it's so far away. I mean, this is just going to push it back even more.
Here's Gerald Salenti with today's trends in the news.
Hey, how about the markets today? Dow down. Oh, the quarter isn't starting well. That's all right. It's only temporary. To probably keep going up. But how about gold prices, huh? Oh, let's see. Gold today hit 2,000. It closed at $2,280 an ounce. Whoop. No news to Trends Journal subscribers. One of our top trends for 2024. A golden year for gold. We called it. We told you it would happen. Gold's up now about $250 since we said this. An ounce. There's your article right there. The trend is your friend. History before it happens. That's what we give you. The trend is your friend and the Trends Journal is your friend. Oil prices. Oh, hey, oil prices are hovering around almost $90 a barrel now for Brent crude. Let's go back a few months ago. They were hanging around $73 a barrel. But Trends Journal subscribers, We told you so. Again, one of our top trends, we warned about oil prices going up because of World War III. Been writing about it now week after week, month after month, since the Israel war began, when Hamas attacked on October 7th, 2023. We said that Israel is going to keep ramping up this war. They're going to attack Lebanon, Syria, and Iran. If they attack Iran, or not if, when, you're going to start seeing prices go up. So before we go into that, I want to take a look at what's going on in the markets again. One of your top trends for 2023 was office building bust. All right? We warned about this, and we said as a result of this, one of your top trends of 2024 is going to be banks go bust. So here are a couple of articles. They barely talk about it. This is Tuesday, March 26th. S&P Global downgrades outlooks of 5 regional U.S. banks to negative. Oh, wow. No kidding. Son of a gun. Banks face $2 trillion wall of commercial property debt. This is reported today in the Financial Times. How long we've been warning about this? $2 trillion, ready? Banks will have to cut their exposure to commercial real estate because of a $2 trillion quote wall of property debt coming due. No shit. Blow me the fuck away. Guess what? They can't cut their exposure. They're going to get defaults on the loans. They're going to be a banking crisis, the likes of which we've never seen. That's what's also bringing up gold prices. The people that know. They estimate $2 trillion of U.S. commercial real estate debt maturing would have to be refinanced at much higher interest rates. Duh. This is old news to Trends Journal subscribers. Again, go back to last year around this time, Silicon Valley Bank went bust. Oh my God. Oh, the markets went berserk. Gold prices went up. That was one bank. Now you're looking at about 300 from the latest data that are in trouble. This banking crisis is a crisis like we've never seen before. Again, it goes back to your office building bust. This just came out today. Office vacancy rate nears 20% to set a fresh record. Moody's. 20% vacant. Nobody in them. Your office occupancy rate, according to Castle Systems, is about 51%. Vacant. How are they going to pay their loans on a vacant building? Downtown Portland's office vacancy rate, highest in the nation. Nearly 30%. Portland was booming. New York City's delinquency property taxes soar. Yep. Overdue property taxes are forecast to reach the highest level ever, jumping by over 30%. Thanks to the COVID war. Thanks. Again, why are gold prices going up? The Israel war, the Ukraine war, banks go bust, office building bust. This is a golden year for gold. And then on the Ukraine war front, prepare for Putin pivot to invade us, says Baltic states, ramping up wars. We were warned. Europe has entered pre-war era. That was this guy, Poland, the Prime Minister Tusk said back on March 30th. And they just came out again. And he said, Europe's peaceful era has ended. No, actually, he said this earlier. He just said on March 30th. He said, the times of peace are over. The post-war era is over. And then he just said on March 30th that the war is no longer a concept from the past. It is real. And it started over 2 years ago. Yep. Every NATO member has military personnel in Ukraine, according to Estonia, which means they're at war with Russia. And then again, we look at the world and see what's going on. When the COVID war began, we warned that when people lose everything and have nothing left to lose, they lose it. They're going to lose it financially, spiritually, physically, mentally. And they have.
Can Israel fight 2 wars, or will, as you indicate, I think, ironically, Prime Minister Netanyahu said something similar yesterday, this will be over in 3 or 4 weeks. What will it do? Just leave Gaza and move all of its troops north? Let's assume it does that. Can it fight that war against Hezbollah and against Iran without American troops on the ground and American air power? I mean, American pilots flying American planes. I don't mean Israeli pilots flying the planes that we've given them.
I don't see how they could, Judge, not without our straight capabilities. So not without our aviation, our drones, our missile strikes. I don't see how Israel could conduct that type of war against Iran, particularly how Iran has been preparing for a war like this for a long time, has the ability to reach Israel through its allies in Iraq and in Syria. So people look at the map and they might say, hey, Iran is really pretty far away from Israel. But you have to remember that the Iranians have allies in Syria as well as in Iraq, of course, thanks to the American invasion of 2003. They didn't have those allies in Iraq before then. Now they do. Right. And then, of course, Hezbollah, which
will America ever learn its lesson that these invasions produce generations of animosity, which comes back to bite us?
Right. And it's the problem is, too, is that I think, Judge, why they don't learn the lessons is they feel that those in power feel they are disconnected from the past. That those were the mistakes of previous generations. We know better. Look, I remember being on television with retired generals, with Brett McGurk, the guy who's been in charge of Middle East policy for both Republicans and Democrats now for more than 10 years. And these people just swearing that we know better now. We've learned the lessons of Iraq. We've learned the lessons of Afghanistan. This is why we'll be successful. And the problem about that explanation I just offered, of course, is that it's belied by the fact that it's the same people. So we're asking the same people to learn lessons about themselves. The same men and women who are conducting our Israel policy, who are conducting our Ukraine policy, they are the same men and women who ran our Afghan policy, who ran our Iraq policy, who ran our Libya policy, who ran our Syria policy, who've been running policy with regards to Africa for 20 years now, right? So why would we expect there to be anything different? We also have to realize that their intentions are the benefit of the empire. Their intentions are not stability. Their intentions are not any type of peace, whether it be regional or global. Their intentions are not the welfare of the American people. Their intentions are to support the empire and all the aspects of the empire. So whether it's the corporations, the banks, the fossil fuel companies, the weapons companies, whether it's just looking at the map. And, whether or not the map now is in the same color shades that it was before, right? So as if it's a game of Risk, whether or not the American empire has been maintained, or whether or not the American empire has grown, or God forbid, the American empire shrinks, right? I mean, this is the type of mindset that these people have. And again, then when you're talking about men like Joe Biden, you're talking about Mitch McConnell, you're talking about people like Jake Sullivan or Tony Blinken, power is their ends, right? So the means are the ends themselves. They only care about the seat that they're in. They have no ideological destination. They have no greater goal or greater good they're trying to accomplish. It's power for power's sake. So whatever they need to do to both please the empire as well as please their benefactors to maintain their positions in the institutions of the empire, then that's what they're going to do. So when we ask these questions about why haven't they learned their lessons, it really is kind of a circular question, or a question that's right is rhetorical, because they're never going to. They don't see these as lessons. They just see this as the expansion of their own projects, both individual and institutional. Right? So the Americans would protect the Israelis if the Israelis use a nuclear weapon against Iran. Iran understands that, and they have to be very careful in their response not to go past the line that would allow Israel to use that nuclear weapon. Anyone watching these last 6 months who doesn't think Israel will use a nuclear weapon, I just don't know what to tell you. And as well as to the fact that the United States will protect Israel after using that nuclear weapon. Same thing too. If you've been watching these last 6 months, that's exactly what the United States would do. I saw right before we came on, I saw the United States State Department's response to the killing of those 7 aid workers, one of whom was an American citizen. And it basically was like you'd expect, Judge, just like what we heard from Anthony Blinken, what we hear from Matt Miller, from John Kirby. Oh, this is a tragedy. It should be investigated. But we stand by Israel, and Israel has a right to defend itself. And it's just absolutely sickening. But it's also very, very dangerous, as we've been saying, because we are now at this point where Israel is doing everything it can to provoke a war with Iran with the intention of having the United States fight alongside of it. And it's a war that could go nuclear.
And nothing's going to change. Joe Biden's not going to pick up that phone call like Dennis Kucinich suggested and say, you're on your own, pal. It's just not going to happen.
Right. Well, and that's one of I think the Israelis' calculations, Judge, is that this is the election year. And we've got Joe Biden over a barrel. Look, we can continue to humiliate the United States. We can continue to get them to say whatever we want them to say, like a puppet on a string. They're going to keep giving us their weapons and munitions, even though we are just committing these gross acts of brutality and collective punishment. But it's an election year. What's Joe Biden going to do? What's the Democratic Party going to do? Are they going to buck the Israel lobby? Well, good luck to you then. So this for the Israelis, the opportunity here, they may not ever get another opportunity like this to make sure the Americans are linked arm in arm with them as they are now. So we really are. This is a terrible, terrible position to be in.
Matt Ho, thank you very much, my dear friend.
So I really don't think they know what they're doing at this point. They've lost control. They know it. They have not managed to regain control. And their only bet, I think, at this point is to make sure that Trump himself does something to self-implode, because their own ability to actually win back people. And I've had conversations with folks from the Democratic Party to try to make the arguments. And it's just stunning to see how tone deaf their arguments are, how they've profoundly misread their own base, not understanding why they feel this way, not understanding that they're seeing things that the average American who only watches TV and mainstream TV is not seeing. They're not getting that. And they're not getting the fact that this is not, I mean, the fact that they're going out there saying that those voters would be single vote issues, or what is it called, single issue voters. In the minds of a lot of people, this is a genocide. So yes, that is going to be an issue that trumps everything else, particularly mindful of the fact that the United States, thanks to Biden, is complicit in it.
All right, so what are the chances of the war in Lebanon getting much worse? Sorry to ask you to make a prediction, but it seems like that's the real danger, next step in regional war if we're going to have one.
So this goes to a larger question of, if Biden is trying to get rid of Netanyahu, how is Netanyahu going to react to it? On the one hand, I think Netanyahu actually welcomes having this fight with Biden. It plays well for him, he believes, internally. It also moves him further to the right. But one of the things that he may actually do as a result of all of this, and I'm not saying that he wouldn't have done it anyways, but it may actually happen sooner than otherwise, is to actually ramp up things militarily, both in Gaza, perhaps going into Rafah, but also with Lebanon. And there is a concern right now. It's been going up and down. It's been more intense at certain moments and then less, but it's going up now again, because there seems to be a pattern now in which the Israelis are not just bombing Lebanon, they are targeting paramedics. They seem to be really angling to get a strong response from Hezbollah and then use that as a pretext to launch a larger war with Lebanon, which would be a devastating war, of course. And the administration has said from the outset that that is something that they've been trying to push Netanyahu not to do, which may be a reason for Netanyahu to do it, because he wants to show that Biden cannot tell me what to do or not to do. But it will be devastating. It will be further devastating for Biden. His base will lose further hope and faith in him, because Biden will have utterly failed to contain the indiscriminate bombings in Gaza, and now the war has further expanded. Once that happens, you're also probably going to see a breakdown of this uneasy truce that seems to exist right now, in which the Iraqi and Syrian militias, for now, have stopped attacking U.S. troops.
I think also there's a real question of, if you take the stories from leading up to October the 7th, where the consensus inside the IDF and whatever Israeli security forces was, Hamas are a bunch of punks. They're not going to do anything. We're not worried about them. Now, Hezbollah, those guys know how to fight, and they got a lot of missiles nowadays, and this kind of thing. We've got to be careful about that. But anyway, so that's the part of the story to focus on, is Hezbollah is not Hamas, and they have not been locked in a concentration camp this whole time or under occupation in the last 20 years. And I know Israel bombs the hell out of their guys receiving weapons in Syria pretty often, but they seem to continue to receive them anyway. And in 2006, they did a hell of a job fighting the Israelis to a stalemate and a reversal over, 4 weeks in the summer of 06 there in July. So
it was a humiliating defeat for the Israelis back in 2006.
And it doesn't look like the IDF has gotten a lot stronger and more capable.
The battlefield has evened out in comparison, because now you have drones and other cheap but very efficient technologies that were not a big part of the picture back then. And the Israeli approach is going to be very similar to what they've done in Gaza, which is just carpet bombing the place, which of course will cause a tremendous amount of human suffering again.
I worry that they would need B-52s to carpet bomb the place with the kind of carpet bombing that they would require to take out all those missiles. And Israel doesn't have B-52s.
The Israelis know. One number I heard from an Israeli expert is that their own estimation is that there will be about 40,000 casualties on the Israeli side in a full-scale war with Hezbollah.
Yeah, well.
So it's obviously a very, very devastating war for the Israelis as well. But Netanyahu, let's also be frank, he needs these things to stay in power, and he needs to stay in power in order to stay out of jail.
Yep.
And he also has then increasingly right-wing fanatic voter base that so far is quite thrilled not only with what is happening in Gaza, but who believes that it's not gone far enough, that are pushing him to go into Rafah, and who have also favored a war with Lebanon. And the narrative there, of course, is precisely because Hezbollah is way more powerful than Hamas. Imagine if Hezbollah were to try to pull off what Hamas did on October 7th. It would be far more devastating. And as a result, it is not tolerable to live next to Hezbollah. You have no choice but to have that war. And it's better to have that war on our choosing when it comes to the timing rather than on Hezbollah's choosing of timing.
The Bush doctrine and the Netanyahu doctrine. Which is the chicken and which is the egg?
There's so much energy spent on trying to stir up trouble that seems so unnecessary. And guess what? I hate to have to do this, but it has a lot to do with our government's foreign policy. I mean, why do we have to do this? And with so much evidence that so many times we got involved, it doesn't help our national defense. It costs a lot of money, and we make more enemies, and we don't have more security. Yeah. But they keep doing it. Of course, we've talked about that before. We think it might have to do with some money, some money, but people making money off this system. But anyway, unfortunately, the American people have gone along with it, and yet, guess what? We're seeing a break in that. Maybe if we're looking at this effort going on today, especially in Gaza, the American people are starting to wake up, as well as Ukraine. You know, there's a segment there that, surprisingly enough, we're disappointed with the progressives, but there's still some that will stand out. But there's a segment of Republicans that figure maybe they'll be conservatives on spending military money. That would be a big help in this stuff. But if it's our money and our intelligence gathering, we have a moral responsibility. We have a physical responsibility. The Americans have a responsibility to use their money, and they're also endangered because, there was a time when people were pretty upset with us, and on 9/11, there were a lot of Americans killed, and it was domestic, and so they're capable. But if you say that, oh, you guys are really softies. You don't want to stand up for the American people. Well, just maybe that standing up for the American people may involve having a less aggressive foreign policy, and that is what I think I really believe in. And that does not mean you give up any defense of the country. I really believe sincerely that our country is better defended and we're more capable of defending ourselves if we have a non-interventionist, non-aggressive foreign policy.
It really is a threat to our security, to be seen, as you say, as the facilitators of what is objectively a slaughter. But I think, Israel also, they are trying to expand this conflict. I think that's the reason for the Damascus bombing. They're desperate to have the U.S. involved. They're not reaching their goals in Gaza. There's still plenty of Hamas fighters who are fighting back. There are protesters in the streets. The government, may well fall. The war is widening. So I think this is kind of a desperation move in a way to get the U.S. involved, and it may work. But within this whole backdrop of all these horrible things that happened yesterday, if you can skip ahead, I got these in the wrong order, to the U.S. ways selling new fire. This is from Politico, the clip. So in light of all this, U.S. ways selling new fighter jets, missiles, and guidance kits to Israel. And so as we're saying, Dr. Paul, if the rest of the world looks at this, looks at the slaughter of aid workers and hospitals, and then on the next headline it says we're going to give them more bombs, I mean, how do you think they perceive us?
Say something.
Yeah. Well, I guess the last thing we want to talk about today is, I would say it was kind of a good news story. We need some good news after this, how we open the show. And this is from Politico as well. Our favorite Senate Majority Leader, if we can put it up. He's not going anywhere, Dr. Paul, believe it or not. McConnell, I'll stay in the Senate and I'll fight the GOP isolationist movement. So he's going to stick around, even though he said he's stepping down as Majority Leader at the end of the year. He's going to serve out the remaining 2 years of his term in the Senate, and he's going to fight back against those pesky isolationists.
It's the other side that says, criticizing the isolationists.
Yeah.
They support sanctions.
Yeah.
They support tariffs. They love the WTO regulations, and they talk about NATO, and they say that's what we want. And what are they doing there? They're isolating us from the world.
Yeah.
So we're being isolated more every single day, financially and militarily. And I think that's just double talk. I can't believe that we're going to hear we might hear it, but he won't make any more sense now than he did over the years.
Yeah.
But he say he's going to hang around, or he wants to be, still out there talking about good policy.
I think he's going to get a real wake-up call, because I think when he's out of that leadership, he's going to realize just how inconsequential he is and how little power he actually does have. But if you could put that up again, because I do want to just again mention this part that I had headlined, and you already read it, Dr. Paul, but it's worth, I think, repeating. So the bigger problem, McConnell added, is that more of his conference is agreeing with Paul's view. Now that is great, because he's admitting that he's losing this argument. As you said, Dr. Paul, McConnell said roughly half the Senate Republicans voted for the foreign aid bill and the 16. So half voted against the 60 billion in funding. Many of his own members are now opting against sending Ukraine money. So McConnell is admitting that he's losing this argument, that there is increasing skepticism about his brand of neoconservatism, of interventionism, and he thinks he's going to stop this tide. We can say that we hope that he's not successful and that Senator Paul is successful.
You know, there's a logical argument. A few people use it, but it's surprising it doesn't carry more weight. Somebody comes up and says, we need $60 billion and we need to send all this stuff to Ukraine and keep the war going. And somebody comes up and says, well, where are you going to get the money? Where's the money? We don't have any money in the bank. So where are you going to get the money? They never answer the question. Well, we have to rob somebody else, or we have to raise the cost of living by just printing more money.
Yeah.
They never answer that on where it's going to come from. But it never stops. They go from one place to another, and it's always more and more money. It used to be millions of dollars, now it's billions. Now we talk about trillions of dollars, and it's going to continue unless they change their policy. And that's what we're sensing, that there are hints that policy will change because the people's attitudes are getting sick and tired of it, just like they're sick and tired of the invasion at our borders, of people coming in and displacing American citizens, or having the American citizens who's trying to work and make a living be taxed for this. And that's where the real problem is. The reality will set in when people wake up and finally. But you have to have somebody talking about it. Like I said, nobody answers the question. Well, you want to do all this, but where's the money? Where's the money? Show me the money.
Yeah.